Boys and girls, for this next assignment, assignment 10, we are going to be making artwork out of food. I know that sounds pretty strange, but believe it or not, a lot of things that we use in art come from natural items, some of which are food. We'll be creating our own pigments, and pigment is something that's used in paint or dye to add colors. Many pigments come from plants, sometimes from insects or animals. What I'd like you to do is at the local grocery store, actually first check your pantry and your kitchen and just see if you have some of these items. You only need one. So I'm going to show you a few, but you only need one. One thing you could get to make color is turmeric powder. This is commonly used in many curries. It creates a nice golden yellow. Another thing you can get is paprika. Again, another common seasoning which will create like a reddish brown. Or you can choose to get a purple cabbage. And then the most difficult to work with is beet. It creates a really beautiful color, but you do need a blender if you decide to get this one. You only need to get one, so get one of those items. And I'd also like you to get a potato. We're going to be making a stamp out of this. I know that might sound a little bit babyish, but again, I want us to think outside of the box in terms of art making. So we're going to be using some unusual supplies. Please make sure you again have one potato and one of these items, and we'll begin now. Okay, so for the first step, what I'd like you to do is just get a knife and cut your potato in half. A student had asked me if you can use a sweet potato, and a sweet potato is fine. We're going to be creating our own stamp. The stamp will kind of look like this when we're done, which is kind of like weird and gross because I've used colors on it. And to create our stamp, we're going to just carve in using a simple paper clip. Please do not use a knife because it's really easy to accidentally stab yourself. A paper clip is safe and it won't hurt you. The first thing I'd like you to do is think of a simple shape. This has to be simple. You're carving a picture into a potato. There's limits here, okay? Don't try to draw a really detailed face. Keep it simple, like different shapes, circles, triangles. You can see this one's based off a circle. This one's based off a triangle. So I'm going to go ahead with my triangle. What I'm going to do is open my paper clip like this, and then just simply carve the shape, just outline a shape so I know what to start with. So I've outlined here a triangle, which I know you probably can barely see. But I can see it, and you'll be able to see the shape you trace. And then, with the kind of round flat end like this, I'm just going to go in and begin to scoop away the area around my triangle, okay? It's a little bit, it's easier to do when you're on your table. It's hard for me because I'm holding it like this, so it's a little bit awkward. But I'm going to go ahead and just start to carve this out. Okay, so you can see that I have carved out the area around my triangle, leaving my triangle to raise from the surface. Now think of a stamp. Whatever the stamp, the highest point, when it touches a color, it'll soak up all that color and it'll be able to stamp it in many places. So the part that we carve away, this part on the outside, will not have paint on it. Only the high thing will have paint on it. Now, I'd like you to add some smaller details. You can see I've kind of got like weird finger-like shapes in there. And this can be a little bit more challenging with this tool. What I suggest you do is kind of hold it at an angle. So instead of carving flat like this, tilt it to the side kind of like that when you're carving your shapes. And you can go ahead in with that and add little details. So if I try to do one here, and I know it's hard to see, I'm just going to hold it at that kind of sideways angle and carve out a little line. You can see that, okay? So add some smaller details to your stamp now. Okay, so now I am done, and you can see I've added just some small little finger-like details in a little bitty hole. And then once you carve this, it's important to let it sit out, I would say, for a day and let it kind of dry out. When it's done, when it starts to dry, it'll kind of have this appearance. It might turn a little bit brown, and that's okay. It's just easier to stamp when it's not so wet, okay? So let it sit for a day and then do the next step. So now we're going to make the pigment out of turmeric. So the turmeric, as I mentioned, is this root here. Remember, buy a smaller one so you're not wasting money. You can see I have a bowl of it and I've got a little bit of water, and I just want you to add a little bit of water to start because you don't want this too thin. You kind of want to mix it around. It should be kind of thick, almost like if you think of the paint in school. It has kind of a strong smell, turmeric. It's actually really good for you. It's a good anti-inflammatory if you have parts of your body that feel swollen. So I would say that this kind of thick, soupy texture is actually what we're looking for. So it's always best to start with a little bit of water, and if you feel you need to add more, you can add a little bit more. You can't really take the water away, you can only add, so just start with a tiny little bit. That's how you mix the turmeric paint. And the same thing can be done for paprika. So if you see here, paprika is kind of the redder color. You can add just a tiny bit of water to that, mix it around, and it'll make a beautiful earthy red. And that could be another color you choose to create. Now, for the cabbage, which will make a bright purple, I've already cut one in half. You don't need to use a whole one. I think half one will be fine. And then, if you're not familiar with using a kitchen knife, please ask your parents to do it. And you can just kind of cut this up into other pieces. Again, please have your parents do it. Remember, your hand should be nowhere near a knife. And we're going to go ahead and put this in the boiling water here. Now I have some boiling water, and I am just placing this inside of there. In fact, I'm going to save a little bit for later. I don't need to use all of it. Okay, and then now that this is boiling, I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit. I don't want it boiling over. I just kind of want it what they call simmering, which is bubbling a little bit. And I'm going to let that sit there for about, I think, a half hour. And what you'll start to notice will happen is the purple color will come outside of the leaves and into the water. My cabbage is finished boiling for about a half hour, so I'll bring you over here. And I'm going to go ahead and just scoop 2 bits of the juice into different glass containers. You can see they're both kind of a dark purple. And here's a fun little trick. Cabbage juice is pH sensitive, and what that means is it will change color if you add certain ingredients. So for example, if I take a little bit of baking soda and I add just the tiniest sprinkle into here, it will begin to change color into kind of a blue color. So give it a minute and you'll see it'll actually start to change more and more blue. And then if I add just a touch of vinegar into this, it will turn a brighter red. So you can see that this has already turned a brighter shade. You don't have to add these things, but they will create different colors. Now we can set them aside for painting. Very good, boys and girls. So here's how I suggest setting up for this project. You can get a blank piece of paper like this. You can see I've just used some printer paper. And then I set up my colors. I've got my paprika, my turmeric, and my cabbage juices. Now I changed the color of my cabbage juices into a pink and a blue, but you can keep yours just a purple. You don't have to do that step. I also have the potato stamps here, and I have a brush. So go ahead and set up your area now. For this step, boys and girls, you get to get in touch with your inner child and just kind of have fun making some stamps and some marks. We're not trying to make anything look realistic or serious. When you're using the potato stamp, you really can only work with the 2 more powdery, thick substances. It doesn't work so well with the watery cabbage. So I'm going to just go ahead and just dive right in. I think I'll stick this in here. You can see it kind of has this appearance. And then I'm going to stamp it on my paper. And it's not going to be perfect, okay? Please remember that you've made a stamp out of a potato. It's not going to be perfect. But I'm going to go ahead and move this image around like this on my surface. I might try this other color out too. Okay, so let's see. Right? Now, it'll kind of have like a powdery look to it. Okay. If you were using real traditional paint, this would show up a little bit better. Now I want you to leave some white space because we're going to be doing some other things in this area. I got myself a brush. I'm going to go ahead and get some cabbage juice and lightly paint it. It's not a bright color. It's very, very soft and light. We're not using paints from the store, so the kind of things that we're going to get is going to be pretty simple. Now, we're going to leave, I know it's hard to see, we're going to leave a lot of blank area on here because we're going to be going in here with some traditional mark making tools like crayons, colored pencils, markers, and we're going to add to this image. We're going to let this dry. I would say it'll take up maybe a half hour, and then we'll finish it up. So now my paintings are done, and you can see that the paprika and the turmeric have dried, and the cabbage is actually quite a light color. It's a light, light blue. If you were to use this with fabric, it would be a brighter purple, but on paper it kind of fades to a lighter color. What I want to do is mix this with colors that have been made by machines and don't come directly from plants. So I asked you to look around your house and just find whatever kind of colored items you have lying around. So I found a few of my daughter's colored pencils, not the really fancy ones like we have at school, but they will do. She also happened to have a package of crayons, and I found some highlighters and some pens. So just find whatever you have. Maybe you only have like 3 colored pencils, but use those. Maybe you only have a few crayons, use those. Use whatever you have. And what we're going to start to do is draw some patterns on this paper. Okay, students, so you can see I started to kind of color this in. And notice that I've just colored around my original turmeric stamp with some of the colors that I have here. So again, all this is some of my colored pencils and my marker and even some blue pen. I have done things like looked at this kind of flowery shape and then just repeated it in some of my drawings, okay? So what I'm going to do now is just continue to fill this in. If you guys find that like coloring the background in an interesting way is taking too long, it's totally fine to cut the paper in half and just color in a quarter page, okay? So what I want you to do is finish out the paper coloring it in. Okay, so I have finished coloring in my picture. It looks really different from when we first started this assignment. So when we started, it's just these kind of stamps of natural colors, and then using different items that I just happened to find around my house, highlighter, old colored pencils, pen, crayons, I colored this in and made it much more colorful. So boys and girls, again, if this becomes like too tiresome and you find that like you're spending too much time, simply cut this paper in half and color in just half of it, okay? I can't wait to see your interesting abstract pictures made of natural and synthetic color.